Hello and welcome to the Restore Wrestling channel with myself, Kieran, and of course Gareth, as always.
It's me, Mister. I've got a degree in storytelling, so I know what I'm talking about. So fuck yeah, fuck everyone else.
Mate, you're already throwing it in front of people.
Yeah.
On a video where we aim to talk about storytelling, which you're going to ace at and I'm going to suck at. But yes, we're going to be talking about the exceptional use of nuance in AEW storytelling, particularly Adam Page's story since the beginning of the year, where he teamed up with Kenny Omega, and we got to see the story between the two, the conflicts between the two, their pros, in regards to winning the titles, but then the conflicts and how that impacted them, the issues they've been having, whether it was Revolution, or it was All Out, a variety, or the Dynamites in between, which there were plenty. We're all about that. So, Gareth, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think, like you said, there's the big moments of the ups and downs, but it comes almost more in the week-to-week stuff, and how it feels like every week there's been something that moves it forward. Not necessarily a major plot point, but something to just hold the story and progress it. I think too much in wrestling, we just see a promo or we just have a match and it's like there's not a lot to it. And oftentimes that has been the case in AEW, but something will happen within that match. So, for example, just to use an example from this story is when they had that 8-man tag match. I don't think it was the really good one, the one where one of FTR got injured and then Hangman went out with them. That was a little piece of nuance within the story that kind of progressed it without really doing anything. We'd seen Hangman kind of hang out and kind of favor FTR a few times before then, and obviously that all built to Hangman screwing the Young Bucks to help FTR. So all these little things, for example. So I think that's just one thing which I think this story in particular has over a lot of other wrestling, is that like every match, every little segment seems to have its purpose.
It does. And before we dive straight in and we go into the nitty-gritty of this story, we just want to make it clear as well that this by no means a video saying that this is the best story in the world, although I'm sure Gareth would have something to say on that. As not to say like this is the best and therefore if this isn't your favorite story in the world in wrestling, then you're wrong. It's by no means that. This is basically a video to appreciate the use of nuance within this story, utilized by AEW, of course, because it's not something that we see enough of in the wrestling industry as a whole. So that is what this is about. Before we trigger anyone, that is what we're all about. So, as you were talking about moments, we could talk about a variety of stories in the past regarding moments, and that are those and it's very understandable how people attach these moments to pigments in their memory of the time when Daniel Bryan, he lost a WrestleMania to Sheamus within 10 seconds, and then he had some solid, great matches, and he was always underutilized, and he was always under the radar. Even when he had the World Heavyweight Championship, it was always like he never had the same. He didn't have a champion feel to him, and the company wasn't treating him in such a way. And then he wasn't being appreciated enough. But he was entertaining. You had the thing with Kane, and then they went to SummerSlam, and it was John Cena. The crowd were firmly behind Daniel Bryan. They gave him what they want, and the story going forward, where he got the title, but then he suffered towards the end in losing it to Randy Orton on a cash-in with the Money in the Bank. A variety of things. These are all moments.
Yeah.
There are very little details there. There aren't minute details to sort of really get into the nitty-gritty of where the characters are in their motivations, where sort of the way in which they're thinking. I can't really explain myself too well here. I think you could probably do a better job.
I can probably take your point and run with it. Like, for example, on that Daniel Bryan one, the story that we kind of look back and paint wasn't one that was planned out. So when Daniel Bryan was doing, all these other things in the lead up to that match with John Cena, for example, it wasn't planned that it was all going to end in him winning at WrestleMania. Him winning that match against John Cena and being cashed in on was more of a angle for Orton and the Authority to get heat than it was a plan for a big payoff. I think not long after that they did plan for a Triple H match, and I imagine there wasn't an idea to have that match with Triple H, but the bigger story of him winning the titles wasn't there. And then you saw that as well, like the few months after that, Bryan starts doing random stuff. He starts getting involved in the Wyatt family. It's just like there was no character reason. It wasn't like he was particularly doubting himself. We weren't really seeing that nuance. Again, come back to that word. We weren't seeing that nuance inform those character decisions. It was they didn't have anything else for him to do, so they threw him in with the Wyatt family, and he had a story there. And it was basically just he was a really over face, and they didn't want to put him in their title scene, so they had the Wyatt family who needed a good face to go up against for a few months. So they had him join, took him away. He obviously had everything with the Royal Rumble, which was a mess in itself. And I think after then they started to realize you then had again moments we come to, and moments maybe with a little bit more nuance to them in that Daniel Bryan and the fans taking over the ring and demanding that match with Triple H and with the stipulations and stuff. There's more to it then, because at that point they're like, we have this end goal in mind, and you can see that because immediately then in those few months building up to WrestleMania, every action was informed with the end goal in mind. And that ultimately is what it comes down to. So a lot of the time when people look back on stories that had really cool moments or something, a lot of the time these are things which booked a week or 2 weeks before, or sometimes on the night, especially in WWE with Vince. But we know how he likes to do things. A lot of these moments are things which are kind of just booked on the night, and they're memorable because they're cool, but they're not shrouded in nuance, which again is the word we keep coming back to. And I think that Daniel Bryan story, in terms of me as a fan when I was watching it, that was one of my favorite things, because even though it wasn't great storytelling for 9/10 of that story, if you take it from his loss to Sheamus to winning at WrestleMania 30, most of that wasn't good storytelling, but I was so invested in him that I kind of went along for the journey. Doesn't mean there wasn't a story told. It just means that those telling it hadn't planned it, and therefore it was more something happening, and you kind of taken along for the journey. And a lot of the time that is the case in WWE. Again, we're not going to go in depth on these ones, but Kofi Mania was similar. It was something that kind of came about naturally. The Becky Lynch story as well, I think, was the WrestleMania before that. Or was it? No, it's the same WrestleMania, wasn't it, as Kofi Mania? That kind of all came to a head. So like these things all kind of picked up from real life, whereas the whole Adam Page stuff, it's all fabricated. Adam Page and Kenny Omega don't have a problem in real life. Adam Page and the Young Bucks don't have a problem in real life. We know they're still best friends, but the story they're telling is all fabricated, and it's so shrouded in nuance that you believe it.
Exactly. I could not agree with you. And when we talk about nuances and just really get into the detail of what that actually means, got a definition in front of me here. We're talking about subtle differences or distinctions in expression, meaning, and response. So essentially, rather than having a humongous big of a moment, which is very, very wrestling oriented, we see in wrestling time and time again. And that's not to say that that's bad. It's not to say like it's the worst thing in the world, because we're not saying that. It's just like when you do things subtly and you change things ever so slightly, which can provoke questions, which can introduce more meaning in general, it can just lead you as a viewer to think more of the situations of where these characters are placed within and where they could be headed. Basically, there's been multiple occasions when watching Dynamite where we've been left, is it Omega? Is it Paige who's going to be turning? And that's because the groundwork wasn't laid there right in front of you in moments to say, oh, well, Kenny Omega has to, because of this particular occasion here. They've set the groundwork. It would make no sense if... I couldn't think of examples on top of my head, unfortunately. But essentially, if we did get a big old moment in the background of... Essentially, right, think of Adam Page and how he held the Young Bucks down. He could have just beat them up.
Yeah.
He could have just beat them up, but he didn't.
Yeah.
What he did is he just simply tied them down. Yeah. You know, not winning them. So essentially, it's a fact of them not winning. So in my opinion, a very WWE approach, a very non-nuanced approach would be to come in and beat them up during the match, before the match. Very typical. You know, maybe with FTR by their side or something like that, them doing it together or something ever like that. But instead, what he did is, because of course he respects him, the journey that they've had before, he's not going to resort to those actions. What he's instead going to do is do the least minimal damage that he can possibly do. That doesn't position Page in a position of him being an absolute dick. And a lot of people on Twitter thought that this was a heel turn.
Yeah, because that's how conditioned people are in wrestling.
Exactly.
When it comes to someone does something not good, they're like, well, he's got to be heel now. And I think that is something which AEW are going to have a job of trying to unlearn from people. I think most people then got through the responses and stuff that, okay, he hasn't turned heel, he just did that thing and now he feels bad. And then they were kind of like, okay, that wasn't a heel turn. But a lot of people in the moment were like, he's turned heel. That's what Twitter was kind of exploding with. And then I think me and you, there was a worry that they could be going that way again, purely because of how conditioned we are as viewers to wrestling, that it's like when you see something like that, you can understand people's reactions to that. But what I love so much about this is that I grounded myself and was like, no, I have faith they're going to tell the right story here and they're not going to do something silly like that. And an action like that can happen and be forgiven, at least in the eyes of the audience.
Exactly. And again, that was a very subtle, a very meaningful, definitely a moment, but not a mental WWE sports entertainment like moment. It was again layered in nuance, and it also gave the opportunity then to explore Young Bucks and their frustration. And ultimately, it put you in a position as well. And I think this is something that I thoroughly enjoy with AEW as well, where no one's neither good or bad. And this is something that a lot of people talked about over the last few months with this feud as well, is that people are just making questionable actions. They're not bad or good.
Yeah.
Which is very human. It's would come back to nuance. It's all just the very subtle things. It's not that someone is inherently always bad and will always do the bad thing. It's that, no, sometimes Hangman Page will sometimes hold people back just so he doesn't have to face them again, a variety of things, and deal with the conflicts later on. He would rather not have to deal with those things, you know, at the end of the day, alcoholism and stuff, variety of other little things. But then you got Kenny Omega on commentary last night, who was looking down on Page, being surprised of Page's ability, very subtly, but his tone of voice, again, the subtlety of his voice that gave the message of, and I can't remember it word for word, but he was saying Adam Page was trying to be a singles wrestler. Yeah. These little things. So again, a questionable act, not a huge act. He's not beating anyone up. He's not going to resort to hitting. He's going to go in a car in frustration and rant as anyone would in, you know, a conflict with their friends or something ever like that. But he's simply going to no, I'm fed up with this. Yeah,
I was going to say that point on him going to the car and what happened at All Out was really interesting to see how people responded. Because I remember when it happened and I was like, okay, I wasn't expecting that. But then I was like, that's good. I didn't want a violent turn because, again, when you look at, for example, I'm going to pick a couple of examples of stories which people think are really good and they're not bad, but they think are incredible. So, for example, Ciampa versus Gargano is a pretty basic story of guy turns on the other guy for no real apparent reason. Again, when you come back to nuance, Ciampa didn't have a reason really to turn. He was frustrated, but that's not enough. We've seen the Young Bucks be frustrated and they still gave Hangman chances. So, and you know, you can say he's a bad person, but it's a cop-out. It's easy. It's boring. And so, like, things like that, people are conditioned to expect that Kenny Omega was going to do a violent turn at All Out because that's how they think a turn is supposed to happen, whether that's a heel or just a turn on your team or whatever. But I really like that Omega just left him, and it was so much more there was so much more to it and so much more you could build off it. If he just attacks him, then Hangman immediately then logically says, "You attack me, I want to fight," and then you rush to that match. Whereas if you let it simmer and you have these things like they've had this weird kind of breakup where it's like they don't really know what's going on. Hangman's like, I guess I'm a singles wrestler now, and he's kind of going out there and being a singles wrestler, and he's still great. He's still picked up the win, obviously, on that episode. And then Kenny's there kind of, talking down to him, which could be an angle they kind of take now for months, where it's just Omega could. I really want him to have a match next week and kind of outdo Hangman and kind of tell that story that he is, the next level above him. And then if he wins the title pretty soon, again, he's just showing, I don't need you, I'm better than you, kind of, but without saying it, without being like, oh, I'm better than you, and you know it. And there's a place for people like that. I've just quoted one of the people in that. We saw a story like that, very kind of basic wrestling story that lacked nuance for about 2 months. And again, we aren't saying that AEW is flawless. I think it's a bigger conversation, but there's a big conversation to be had about that MJF Cody storyline. It did pick up towards the end and it was really good in the final few weeks, but for a lot of weeks there wasn't really any nuance. You kind of question what the hell is Cody doing. But for example, that is a perfectly valid thing to do. But I think what I appreciate, and you as well, so much about this story is that those kind of tropes that wrestling has aren't kind of being bought into. This is a much more complex story, and you couldn't do more than one or maybe two of these stories going on at one point. Obviously, we've got FTR involved, Young Bucks involved as well. So there's arguably different stories spanning off of this as well. Not arguably, there are different stories spanning off of this as well. But you couldn't have every story be like this. It would be too much emotional investment. You need those kind of MJF characters. You need those people who are just going to be their character. But when you get a story like this, I appreciate it so much more,
It's so intriguing. It's very anti-wrestling in a way.
Yeah. To the extent that I had a conversation with someone on Twitter where they're like, this isn't wrestling, this isn't how it's supposed to be. And they couldn't accept the fact that this is a form. You can do this kind of stuff in wrestling. Because they had never seen something like this nuance, at least. There's obviously been, in terms of like the themes of the story, this has been done a million times in wrestling before. It's competition, but they take it deeper and then they delve more into the characters and more into the subtleties of the story. But again, the basic themes of it is competition between, number one, teammates, which again, we've seen plenty of tag teams break up and have that kind of do that story. Competition between friends. So Hangman and Kenny come into the tag team picture and then they compete with the Young Bucks. They literally have a match with the Young Bucks and overcome them, especially with Hangman getting the win. But again, that as a story has been done so many times, but the nuance behind it is something which is so anti-wrestling. And when someone like Kenny Omega says he wants to change the way wrestling works, change the rules of it, this is the kind of thing he's talking about. Obviously, I think there's a bigger discussion in the Golden Lovers story, but that's another one which was different, but has similarities to this. But it just shows that Kenny Omega is someone who's going to go above and beyond to try and tell these different types of stories, which I really appreciate, and part of the reason I love them so much.
Yeah, I kind of feel when you said about that individual struggling to comprehend this, like sort of rejecting the way in which this story is progressing, whether it's minimal, and all those things. We're going to say the word nuance countless times, but I'm going to go with minimal because it's very minimal storytelling. It's very little things changing over time. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the whole Jim Cornette thing, not in terms of the things that he says. It's not so much the things that, like the despicable things he says. It's nothing to do with that. But it's more so his vision of wrestling and the way in which the roles of wrestling and how they should be, according to the past and how they're not being adhered to these days.
Yeah.
It very much... that side of Cornette, that's what that reminds me of in a way.
Yeah, this guy was a Cornette stan.
Yeah, and
actively defending. So
oh well, there we are.
You're bang on the money there.
Yeah. So that sort of there we are. That sort of hits it, really, doesn't it? But yeah, it's, and to be honest, I really like. Oh, it's a train. I live by a train, and so I'm just a huge fan of this. essentially. This
Yeah.
is a huge appreciation video of that with Adam Page. And I understand, and I think it definitely has its place in wrestling stories that are completely encapsulated with massive moments. As we
Yeah.
like the biggest one over the years for a lot of people, Stone Cold Vince, the whole happenings between them two, whereas it's me, Austin, or some crap like that, or it's
Yeah.
in a hospital, or it's ridiculous stuff. That for the time was great,
And
right?
it probably would be great now as well. In
It
that,
would.
like, it's fun. It's kind of, I wouldn't say it's mindless as such, but it's definitely more mindless than this is. But like, there's a huge part, and it's like there's a reason some people like superhero movies and they don't like something which is a more long drawn out kind of a film. For example, there's people have their preferences, and that's always going to be a thing. I made a tweet that said that this Hangman Kenny Omega story is narratively so much better than the Stone Cold Vince stuff. And then obviously I knew what I was doing, because I just wanted to annoy some people basically. But I got the responses of, no, that's the best thing that's ever happened in wrestling. It's like, it may well be the best thing that's ever happened in wrestling, in the same way that you might have the opinion that Batman is the best thing that's ever happened in film. But from a narrative point of view, Batman's maybe a bad example, because there are very good Batman films. But, superhero films
Superman.
is
Pick
always the
Superman. I hate
example I go
Superman.
to. Sorry?
Pick Superman. I hate Superman.
Yeah. But superhero films are always the one I go to, because they're so popular, but narratively, they're so simple. And this is another conversation that I've had plenty of times, but like the argument that I constantly have about Black Panther is I think it's the best superhero film. But from the sphere of a superhero film, it doesn't really go into that genre very well. It's more of a film about different things, larger things, about the world, and particularly the Black experience within the world. And that's why I appreciate it so much. But as a superhero film, it kind of breaks all the rules and kind of is in ways very narratively boring. And so I can understand if you go there expecting to watch a superhero film, a lot of people come out of it being like disappointed. So it completely, like, it depends on like what you like, what you're going in for,
Yeah, absolutely.
what your expectations are, and that goes for any form of storytelling. So that's kind of why I made that comparison, partly to annoy people on Twitter, but also because narratively this is so much more rich and objectively better than Stone Cold versus Vince. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy Stone Cold versus Vince more, because again, those moments of fun. I'm watching Fargo at the moment, but sometimes I just want to stick on an episode of Friends, and in a different way, I love that just as much, because it's a different genre, and it's all wrestling. But again, I think people have this conversation in wrestling that one thing has to be better than the other, and it's like you don't really have that in film or TV or any other kind of form of storytelling. You might compare things which are similar. You might compare a superhero film to a superhero film, or a thriller to a thriller, but you wouldn't compare a horror film to a comedy. Like, no one would ever do that. You'd never compare Psycho to 21 Jump Street. No one would ever do that. And I think that's kind of like, again, a subtle bit of nuance that people should kind of have when they approach that conversation. But yeah, I knew what I was doing. Just like
No, exactly. And just to anchor down that point that you made, we've just seen Santana Ortiz versus Best Friends, and that was Wrestling 101 in moments, like a mother, like just beating down on a car, having a bit of just a disagreement in a violent manner, very wrestling-esque, and then you end with a parking lot brawl. And
it was great.
And it was fantastic. You had a little surprise with Orange Cassidy towards the end, which I didn't expect. I should have expected. I think we both didn't expect that. And it ended well. It was funny. It was enlightening. All of those sort of things. It was great. It's just there's a lack of nuance in wrestling today. So when we see that play out in such a really entertaining, very well done manner, and not many people are talking about it in that way. A lot of people are enjoying it, but there is also a lot of people who are saying it's too long. I can't deal with it. It's this. It's bad. It's not. It doesn't. It's not an alternative. Blah 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 blah. It encapsulates a lot of variety of wrestling within it.
Yeah, I think that just shows their particularly when it's like it's too long, therefore I don't like it. It's like you just have a short attention span there. Like
And
you can't compl- again. I'm not saying these people are necessarily doing it, but some people complain about a lack of long-term storytelling, and then when this comes along, a lot of people are enjoying it. It's important to say that,
yeah,
but a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
people as well are there like, oh, or don't, but they basically don't get it because again, if they were watching a TV show and if they're watching, say, a TV show about wrestling and this was all happening within the TV show, they would completely understand it because of the expectations that you have of that medium. But because it's happening actually within the world and you're actually watching it happen, they're like, oh, I don't like this. I like moments. Where are the stars? All this crap. Why is Kenny Omega not doing single stuff? The lack of patience and the short attention span. I think it says more about that to me than it does about the validity of their opinion.
Yeah. And with that, that finishes up our little appreciation discussion on the exceptional use of nuance in AEW storytelling. It's been by far for me personally one of my favorite stories in wrestling as a whole. A little thing I'd like to add on top is, and you briefly talked about it for a couple of seconds a few minutes ago, in how a lot of stories in wrestling in recent times have got their real life influences, whether that is Daniel Bryan, Authority, whether that is Becky Lynch, hell, even Naito over in New Japan. I'm not too sure if we're going to have New Japan people here, but who watch it, but it still had things layered in real life. How in Naito's case in particular, he came out, he was particularly cocky. He was rejected, and the whole story was him sort of changing the way that he is, the way that he operates as a person. It's very analytical way of looking at it. It's a bit more nuanced.
They adapted to the real life reaction. It's like what WWE should have done with Roman Reigns, for example.
Pretty much. But like again, these are all things in real life. But as you said before, this is entirely fabricated.
Yeah.
So my appreciation for that is just incredible out there. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we cap off this video?
No, we could talk about this for days and days. Like, there's so much more. Like, you could go into every detail of the story, but we'd be here forever. I'd say if you haven't watched it, just go back. There's not that many episodes of Dynamite. Just watch from the 1st of January onwards. If you haven't seen it, it's worth getting into.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, there's no better. Every Dynamite is a great Dynamite. So, thank you for joining us on this episode of Wrestle Wrestling. It's been with Gareth, as always. It's great to be chatting. And if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And you'll be getting more from us. This is a very AEW oriented video. If you watch AEW, please consider watching it with us. We do a live stream over on Twitch. The link is down below, so consider following us. If you wouldn't mind, that'd be absolutely phenomenal. We just have a chat while we watch it and we enjoy it together. We've had a couple of great people. We had some great guys. We had Diego. We have Bagu. Loads of great guys come over and we just have a good old laugh sometimes. So if you're interested in having a bit of chat whilst watching, great old AEW will be there as well.
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing. I wrote a thread, I guess it is, on Twitter about the nuance in a specific interview recently on Dynamite that Hangman did and how it plays into the story at large. And I got a lot of praise for it, It boosted my ego a lot. But that is on my pinned tweet over on my Twitter, so you can go follow us. But also go and read that, and definitely go and watch that segment in particular as well. I just wanted to put this in here because it's, I think, my favorite wrestling segment ever. That sit down interview between Tony Schiavone and Hangman Page. I absolutely love it, and so I definitely, if you haven't seen it or if you saw it and didn't really see the nuance and how brilliant it was, I've broken that down over there and you can go check that out.
Yeah, I remember reading that thread, and understandably so. It is an absolutely fantastic thread. No bias, despite it's one of my great mates doing it. But either way, check that out because it is a great thread analysing from top to bottom what it's about. Obviously, you've watched Dynamite since day one. We've watched it. We've watched every single one. So you're going to know the entire background of everything going on there. So check that out. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for checking out this video, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.